This is the day his reign ends.
Succession is, to this day, one of the greatest pieces of television I think I have ever had the pleasure of laying my eyes on. Each season saw ever-heightening tension, continuous character development, and a plotline that harkened back to the early seasons of Thrones. As each season turned a corner, my love grew ever greater. But with no more corners to turn, my heart began to look elsewhere, and as of this moment, it lies with industry. And dare I say it, this show may just be better than Succession. With the third season airing at the moment, the show seems to be getting better and better with each season, just as Succession once did. But unlike a media mogul trying to find a successor for his enormous empire, industry is all about a group of graduates fighting to survive and thrive in an investment bank. And these grads are just as flawed, selfish, and power-hungry as those in Succession. It has a corporate setting that is a high point of similarity, filled with a bounty of high-octane scenes that will send your pulse rate north of 180 beats per minute. The lifestyle of the characters is reminiscent of the indulgence we saw in Succession, and to top it all off, the score is nearly as good. And so it is in these 4 ways that industry might just be better than Succession. Part 1. The characters. Succession had a spectacular array of characters. Logan was a devious old bastard with a truly ruthless attitude. Kendall was forever condemned to live in his shadow and a life chained to inferiority. Roman was a little fucked up. Shiv would really do whatever it took to climb to the top. Tom was an underdog, and Greg was just a little sporous. So if these characters in Succession appeal to you in any way whatsoever, then I can almost guarantee that you'll find some equally depraved individual in industry to latch your emotions onto. Throughout the seasons, industry has several main characters that persistently stick around. Harper, one of the young graduates, is a deeply flawed individual. She lies about her qualifications, having not actually graduated, she cheats the system to benefit her, and she's unrelenting in her ruthlessness in ensuring her pseudo-top dog spot in the workplace. She is an interesting character, much like Kendall was, primarily because of her relationship with her manager Eric. Eric starts out as an MD at Pierpoint, the investment bank that the show is centered around, and has had to fight for his position at the firm harder than most because of his ethnicity, and not necessarily coming from the same prestigious backgrounds as some of the other senior bankers at the firm. Harper, in this way, is very similar to Eric, and it is this shared perspective that brings the two closer together. However, unlike Harper, Eric is able to see the bigger picture to a far greater extent. He has the wisdom that she lacks, and he is able to make much more informed decisions based on his decades of experience, though this has come at a personal cost to Eric. For him, his entire life is his work. He cannot, or willfully chooses not to separate work and his personal life, and sees his underlings as more of his children than his own biological kids. It is throughout the show that we see these two towering egos clash and be a cause of constant friction. Robert, on the other hand, is similarly troubled as Roman was. Lacking present parents, Robert is inherently fragile and desperately longs to fit into a world he doubts he actually belongs to. Inspired by a great mentoring salesman of his, he is constantly trying to prove himself after initially falling by the wayside. Relationships are hard for Robert. Some way or another, they get unnecessarily complicated. And this complication seems to always drag Robert down, whether it's taking the fall for others or just feeling like he is cursed. In some ways, Robert Fate does resemble that of Kendall Roy's, and it makes for an all the more interesting character. Yasmin, another troubled character stuck in a love-hate relationship with her father, also known as daddy issues, finds herself to be slightly on the periphery. Coming from the family of an enormous publishing house, Yaz really only has ever known a life of luxury. Living in the basement of a £14 million house by Holland Park, going on around 14 holidays a year, and not actually separating her bank account from her father's, Yaz struggles to sympathise at times with Harper's perspective on things. As the seasons go on, we see Yaz battle more with this identity as she strives to make her own way in the world. She is a regular source of lust, love and admiration, but struggles to get along with the difficult colleagues that sit beside her on the FX desk at Pierpoint. And then we have Rishi, the old-fashioned trader whose language and idioms never fail the test of originality. He is a homage to the bygone era of traders from the 80s, whose indulgence and vulgarity knew no bounds. His appetite for risk is enough to make any risk management team's hairline recede a further 4 inches, as his rational thinking sometimes escapes his brain. But for all his flaws, he more than often provides hilarity to the corporate setting of the show. In Season 3, there is an entire episode centered around the ballsy trader, and it might just be the best episode in the entire show. It alone is a testament to the spectacular writing throughout the series, the ability of the directors to bring out the best of some of the sideline characters, and is a true insight to some of the lifestyles of the traders and investment bankers from decades past. Each character, each person at Pierpoint, is a treasure trove of intrigue. Complexity is awry, for to work at an investment bank as top tier as supposedly the one in the show is no mean feat. People have died from sleep deprivation and exhaustion at their desks, so for someone to be willing and wanting to pursue such a career is to be of a very certain nature, and that nature bears great resemblance to the characters in Succession. So, if I had to choose between the characters of both shows, I do honestly believe my heart would side with Industry's roster. Part 2. The Corporate Plot. Aside from the great writing, I am sure what drove a large number of followers for Succession was the wannabe and actual corporates of this world. For me at least, and I know this is as much true for others, the corporate setting of Succession was a huge driver of the appeal, and the exact same can be said for Industry. I think that for a lot of people who commute to a rather soulless city job, there is a great sense of their lives being void of all meaning. As such, when a show pops up that, to a great effect, romanticizes and elevates that mundane existence for so many, it automatically provides a huge sense of appeal, and Industry does that just as well as Succession did. It, if you like, adds some purpose to an otherwise purposeless life. Part of you begins to imagine yourself as some of these characters, which all of a sudden detracts from some of the more unfulfilling corporate jobs out there. Now, of course, none of us are actually like any of the characters in the show, but the mere thought, the potential that we could be like them, for better or for worse, is inherently a source of great appeal for the show. Now, just as in the corporate setting of Succession we saw great attention to detail, with Connor drinking one of the Napoleonic wines at his wedding, the quiet luxury clothing choices of the characters, Logan standing on paper boxes to deliver speeches just like Murdoch did, or his house even containing a piece of artwork that was based on Murdoch's ex-wife, Jerry Hall, we see it all the same in Industry too. The subtlety of things like mentioning coalition data, finance meme accounts, and a bottle of Chateau Lafite Rothschild are just several instances that really show that Industry cares about the devil in the detail. It would be very easy to just slap the surface level things on top and call it done, as such a sin was committed in the Russell Crowe film The Good Year, but Industry stops at nothing short of attempting to stay as true to the source material as possible. The writers of the show are entirely aware of who watches this series, and ironically, they seem to take a great deal of respect in that. Nothing is brushed over and terribly unrealistic, apart from the interview questions. Boy, I wish they were that easy. Now, should anyone disagree that this business-esque environment provides a sense of purpose to our lives, I would expect them to agree on the fact that Succession fostered greatness because of its willingness to operate in the shadows. Much like the early seasons of Game of Thrones, no character was off limits from being knifed in the back, no character thought selflessly, and no character was at least one point in the show utterly ruthless. And it is this same Machiavellian, Shakespearean-type theatre that creates such attachment to Industry. Whether it is Harper being wholly ruthless with those above her, Eric pulling a bait and switch, or Rishi showing his one true allegiance to money, all these characters manage to display equally ruthless traits as those that were seen in Succession. And this is just so inherently appealing, because it is the uncertainty of how a character will act that will only add to the stakes of the game, and as humans we seem to have this biological pull towards that very thrill. Now, as great as Succession was, and remains to be, there were at times in the early seasons where the show felt ever so slightly slow, and I think it is safe to say that Industry avoids this problem entirely. Whilst Industry may oversell some of the typical events in the day-to-day at a bank, like order filling, which typically resembles something as simple like, "Oi mate, what order size? You want that VWAP? Alright, sorted, send me the confirms," it does only seem to add to the tension. Nevertheless, the aggrandizing these moments allows the show to roll with the punches and sustain a rhythm few shows can continually match. In season 1 of the show, we have Harper mistakenly book a currency trade in the wrong direction and is eating a massive loss on the desk's book. Watching the Bloomberg terminal tick up with each beat of the musical score, with the middle office ops bloke shouting at her to close out the trade as her losses enlarge, really puts you in the deep end. Or when Harper, yet again, is trying to take stock of Rishi's book and sell it to Jesse Bloom minutes before the market opens, and save Rishi from dumping it into the market and taking a huge hit on it. It all just is quite something. And if you haven't been fortunate enough to watch Season 3 yet, let me tell you, Lumi's IPO scene and Rishi's cable trade are motivating enough to put a monk into cardiac arrest. I also think that, on the corporate setting note, what lures many people into this show is the scale and impact of what is happening on screen. Just like in Succession, it was the decision to determine who runs the media monopoly of Waystar Royco that would turn out to shape future elections, future policy and future thought. Succession's plot was fundamentally significant in its fictional universe, and the same can once again be said for a lot of what happens in industry. We see Peerpoint facilitate buy orders that will end up in de facto acquisitions of companies, and that those companies will go on to have a serious impact on people's lives. From telemedicine to sustainable energy, the knock-on effects are huge. It is this scale of decisions, like trying to root out an archaic culture, creepy men and dangerous work-life balances, that can be seen throughout the show. Whether we realise it or not, these actions, these events, they are not insignificant work-related dramas. They are part of a causal chain that underpins the fabric of reality. It is for these pulsating reasons that I do think industry does the corporate setting job better than Succession ever did. Part 3. The High Life. If you ask most people, why do you want to work in an investment bank, a management consultancy, or a high-flying corporate job, I would expect most people to trot out their pre-prepared interview question answers that would all act as a thin veil for the same thing: money. There is no denying that these jobs pay highly. Well, at least in the US they do. People are, for the most part, not overtly complex, and their desire for wealth is a common one nowadays, with the easy access to a permanent view of celebrity lives and all those who are richer and more successful than us. There is no denying that we can, in a sense, live vicariously through shows like Succession and Industry. Seeing the lavish lives lived before our eyes on our sofas is quite something. Trying to comprehend how someone can just randomly gift a £30,000 bottle of wine, spend a ton of money on blow, or just frolic around on a yacht, it is all a lot, to say the least. But it is this presence of the high life that, for some, and by no means all, will remain appealing. Sure, not everyone wants to get smashed off their face and get bottle service at some trashy club, but I am sure a lot of people would love a very fancy meal in an understated restaurant, or enough money to buy a new car or even a motorbike. And it's not just all about the overtly material like the expensive suits and multi-million-dollar houses. Seeing them go out on shoots, attend members' clubs, or dine in world-class restaurants, it does all rather tempt you. It perpetuates a life that a lot want to live, for better or for worse. I mean, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who doesn't desire at least one thing flaunted in the show, from the material things to the mere way of life. Now, Succession set the bar very high for fostering this sense on screen. After all, each and every one of the characters was a billionaire, at least in the immediate family, and as such, to match this lifestyle would almost require a similar level of wealth. So it is on this note that I might admit Succession pips Industry to the post. Part 4. The music. Finally, I want to touch on a more subtle, yet entirely important note: the music behind the show. Throughout the episodes of Succession and Industry, we see Jay-Z blasted on the speakers and other such high-energy tunes, but we also see, or hear, great scores. Succession obviously has the famous opening theme tune by Nicholas Brittle, that, I might have to admit right off the bat, is likely the best opening piece of music for a show ever created. Seriously. And whilst that means Succession blows Industry out of the water on this one right away, it is not to say that Industry does not itself have a great score. Nathan McKay has a whole roster of tunes that play throughout the show that are far more subtle than those in Succession, but perfectly complement each setting of each scene. It can most certainly be said that for each show, neither would be as good as they were if it weren't for the humble background music. So in this regard, Succession wins. So, to conclude, Industry might just be better than Succession, with a more authentic corporate plot and a better array of characters, but with Succession winning out on the high life and the ultimate score of the television show, is it all that decisive? I'm not the one to say, but if you have any thoughts on the matter, put them in the comments below, and thank you for watching.